Welcome back to the Dry Fasting Club. I'm Yannick Wolf, and today we're going to be talking about hormones and dry fasting, and specifically about aldosterone, a hormone you've probably never heard about because it's not a popular hormone, but it is one who is it is a hormone that is pivotal to the dry fasting experience, and understanding how it goes up and down and just ideas behind it and what it does is going to drastically improve your understanding of dry fasting, why we refeed the way we do, and possible complications to watch out for with dry fasting. So strap yourselves in. We're going to deep dive into aldosterone and try and keep it pretty light, but still dive into some very important topics. If you're intrigued by the idea of dry fasting, you've likely come across mentions of aldosterone and wondered, why does it even come up? Aldosterone might sound like some obscure hormone, but it's actually a key player in how the body regulates fluids and salts, especially during times when you're not drinking any water, just like in a dry fast. So, what is aldosterone? Let's break down what aldosterone really is and why it's so crucial when considering a dry fast. Essentially, aldosterone is a hormone created by our adrenal glands. So, those two small triangular structures sitting on top of your kidneys. And when we start thinking about the kidneys, I right away start thinking about the solar plexus chakra point. If anybody is into deep meditation, and especially if you are chronically ill, what are you waiting for? Meditation is a critical part to healing an illness that the medical community has given up on. Back to aldosterone. So it acts as a sort of gatekeeper, telling your kidneys when to hold onto sodium and when to let it go. Since sodium is a main driver of water retention in your body, aldosterone's directions control the balance between how much water is held in your bloodstream versus released through urination. And I have a little note here. Aldosterone is the main mineralocorticoid steroid hormone produced by the zona glomerulosa of the adrenal cortex in the adrenal gland. It is essential for sodium conservation in the kidney, salivary glands, sweat glands, and colon. So we start to understand that was the definition of what aldosterone is, the official definition, and we see how important it is in various parts of the body when it comes to water retention. When you dry fast, your body goes into a state of conserving resources, especially fluids and electrolytes. Here's where aldosterone becomes important. Without water coming in, your body starts to pull out all the stops to prevent dehydration, which means keeping sodium and water tightly regulated to maintain as much as possible. Normally, you drink water and the body adjusts fluid levels without too much stress. But with dry fasting, there's no new water coming in, so it depends even more on mechanisms like aldosterone to keep your water levels steady. So now we know that aldosterone has a big component of sodium, so let's dive into aldosterone and sodium. The body releases aldosterone to ensure that sodium stays where it needs to be, often at a slightly higher level than usual to compensate for the lack of water. This causes your kidneys to hold on to sodium, which in turn keeps water within your system instead of allowing it to pass out. In some ways, this acts as a cushion against dehydration, allowing your body to operate as usual for longer than you might expect. And if you're getting some light bulb moments, you start to see some things about the refeed. The reason why my refeeds focus on potassium and why it may be a bit of a dry fasting hack to incorporate potassium chloride. So we're usually looking at a thing called KCl, potassium chloride, and we replace it. We use it as a salt substitute. So for about a week after the fast, the biggest dry fasting hack you can do is get rid of your salt and use a potassium salt substitute. The Cl that comes in the KCl actually helps the acidity in our stomach, the stomach acid, to replenish as well. So pairing those two together is a powerful 1-2 punch that you need in the refeed. And then you can also look into my past articles, specifically the one where I say, why do I disagree with August Dunning? And you'll see why baking soda, which incorporates sodium inside of the bicarbonate, with the bicarbonate, is not recommended early on in the refeed, only for specific situations. Now let's move on to aldosterone and potassium. So we're going to continue. However, the story of aldosterone isn't as simple as let's just keep sodium and stay hydrated. Aldosterone plays a role in balancing potassium levels, which also become crucial during fasting. As it tells your kidneys to retain sodium, it encourages potassium release. Think of it like a balancing beam. And I always tell people, life is one big balancing act. And now you can see the sodium and potassium on opposite sides. Potassium is essential for nerve function, muscle contraction, and many other daily processes. But when its levels start to dip, it can cause symptoms like muscle weakness or even cramps. Have you felt that before after a long fast and during your refeed? So during a fast, this potassium and sodium shift might feel like you're going through an internal balancing act. Now, if you're dry fasting, your body won't just conserve sodium indefinitely. It actually goes through phases of adjustment. Studies on longer dry fasts, like those lasting 5 days, show that aldosterone levels do rise pretty dramatically. So they rise initially to help maintain hydration, but this effect isn't permanent. After a certain point, your body may actually start to kind of plateau or even lower aldosterone levels slightly, which appears to be a method of preventing any dangerous imbalance between sodium and potassium over time. That's pretty cool. And we do have studies, especially a 5-day dry fasting study that showed a plateau of aldosterone around day 4 of a dry fast, with a continual increase until day 4 where it topped off. The study unfortunately didn't go further into the fast, so we do see that aldosterone levels come back to baseline in about 3 days. And remember that when you're thinking about the refeed. If you think about it, this process is rather fascinating. The body is in survival mode, but adjusts in such a way that even without new water intake, it finds ways to avoid dehydration. Aldosterone's role in this can't be overstated. It's a critical component of the body's ability to adapt to what would otherwise be a highly challenging situation. In a way, you could say it's what keeps the show running during a dry fast, ensuring that electrolyte levels don't swing wildly out of control and put your health at risk. One of the interesting things about aldosterone during dry fasting is how it interacts with another hormone, vasopressin, or also known as ADH, the antidiuretic hormone. And if you've heard of that before, anything that's antidiuretic means that it preserves water. You pee less. A diuretic, like tea and coffee, makes you pee more. So vasopressin also helps the body conserve water, obviously because it's the antidiuretic hormone, but in a slightly different way. It acts on the kidneys to reduce water loss directly. So together with aldosterone, vasopressin creates a tag team effect that amplifies water retention. The combination of these two hormones allows your body to go without water for much longer than if either were acting alone. And if we go back to some of the dry fasting studies where they actually measured blood levels of different hormones, we see that aldosterone had one of the highest increases out of all of them. And another interesting thing here is that for every single hormone, we have reference ranges. So something that is considered within the reference range is considered normal. And if your blood exhibited lower than the reference range or higher, doctors would flag that as an emergency. For most of these things, even though we get drastic upswings and downswings during dry fasting, not many go outside the reference ranges, but aldosterone is one of those that goes drastically above the reference range. I just thought that was really interesting. This orchestrated effort between vasopressin and aldosterone explains why, even after several days without water, participants in dry fasting studies often show minimal signs of dehydration. Boom. Does that not just blow your mind? Their bodies manage to hold onto just enough water, thanks in large part to aldosterone's influence. In research, it's been noted that although there is an increase in blood osmolality, which means that the blood concentration does thicken slightly. That makes sense, right? The less water, when you are slowly trending towards dehydration, your blood is going to get thicker. If we go off topic and talk about thick blood, and then we talk about the body's ability to eliminate heat, we start to understand why you feel warmer on a dry fast than on a water fast, which actually makes you feel colder. One of those weird things that a lot of dry fasters try and tell others how much easier it is to dry fast, because most people would rather be warm than freezing, especially women. So now we know that the blood is getting slightly thicker, but just a little bit. Participants still continue to show normal blood pressure, normal heart rate, and normal, and sometimes even improved, kidney function. Isn't that wild? These findings reveal how effectively aldosterone and its partner hormones rise to the challenge during a dry fast. And a lot of people that dry fast probably listen to this and are like, I don't care about this information because I already know that dry fast works. But this is for those who are scientifically motivated or scared to try a dry fast. Hopefully this information gives you a little more ammunition to persuade you to try this miraculous healing modality. Now that we've talked about aldosterone and why it works and hopefully persuaded you, the Dry Fasting Club's goal is also to look at both sides. So let's address the possible dangers of aldosterone. And in the article on the website, I highly recommend you take a look there. I have a bunch of images to supplement the text, and on those images I put in a lot of footnotes and I write over them. So highly recommend that if you do want to dive deeper and like really hammer in some of this dry fasting information, the website is an important aspect. So dangers of aldosterone. That being said, it's not all smooth sailing. If aldosterone levels remain elevated for too long, it could lead to an imbalance where the body holds onto too much sodium while losing potassium, like we've talked about so many times. For this reason, dry fasting for an extended period requires a period of adaptation and recovery afterwards, allowing your body to rehydrate and rebalance its electrolytes. Okay, let's think about that for a little bit. Recovery after a dry fast depends on your experience, fasting length, and symptoms. So it is always better to take extra time to refeed to be on the safer side. We know that aldosterone levels return to baseline around 3 days after a 5-day dry fast in moderately healthy individuals. Longer fasts may have longer recovery, so got to keep that in mind. And even multiple fasts in short succession may play a role at keeping aldosterone elevated for longer. In the Scorch protocol, which focuses on 5 days of dry fasting, salt is only brought back in small quantities on day 3, and before that and even during the following days, we use potassium chloride as a salt substitute. Okay, so beyond fasting, aldosterone also plays a broader role in your health. High levels of this hormone, even when you're not fasting, can lead to what's called aldosterone excess, which can cause high blood pressure and increase the risk of heart disease. In the short term, like during a controlled dry fast, the body's natural regulatory systems prevent such issues. Instead, during a dry fast, it's just a temporary increase to help the body adjust to the lack of water intake. And that's why we don't want to overfast. We want to understand this and listen to people with a lot of more experience and realize the risks of having chronically elevated aldosterone or not refeeding properly. So can dry fasting cause primary aldosteronism? And that's one of the issue that is the official disease of having excess aldosterone. It's a concern that some may have, but according to studies and personal experience, it doesn't seem to be the case. We don't really have to worry too much about dry fasting. Within a few days after a longer dry fast, you can experience a form of primary aldosteronism, and some people call that Conn's syndrome, as the body attempts to downregulate this aldosterone. But complications, some people who dry fast without any preparation for the refeed may get edema and bloating. And edema basically means water retention in the body. And this may be difficult to remove. And as a side topic, what is Conn's syndrome? Primary aldosteronism, also called Conn's syndrome, is a disorder in which your adrenal glands make too much of a hormone called aldosterone. Aldosterone helps regulate your blood pressure by balancing sodium and potassium levels in the body. So it's important to think about this and realize that too high aldosterone for too long has possible consequences. So your doctor may be aggressively against dehydration in this case. If you suffer from late-stage kidney fibrosis and atherosclerosis, so issues with your veins, or fibrosis, which could be issues with your liver and any other organs that are going to stage 4 disease, you have to watch out with dry fasting. Yes, the 5-day study indicated improved arterial and renal function, improved blood flow, but it was on healthy individuals. So remember, dry fasting has a lot of counter-regulatory hormones which appear in a special insulin-suppressed state of fasting that will protect you from regular dehydration. Dehydration, when the body is fully functioning, digestive system is moving, insulin is high, creates a completely different situation in the body. We don't even have to talk about anything else. I hope that makes sense. So in essence, aldosterone's role in dry fasting is as a sort of emergency mode that helps your body make it through days without hydration. It does this by tweaking sodium and potassium levels, creating a state where water is held onto for as long as possible without tipping the scales too far in either direction. This balance is why dry fasting, when done in a controlled, safe environment, can be tolerated by the body and even have miraculous benefits for some people. I'd argue for most people, but once again, everything is highly personal, unique, and needs to be taken seriously. Without this finely tuned response from aldosterone, though, and other hormones, the body would quickly face challenges beyond what it could manage without water. And without these hormones, we would basically fall prey to the way you imagine somebody actually dehydrating. And you start to realize that the societal assumption that you can only go a day or 3 days without water starts to become a myth. Another little note here to keep in mind. Let's keep in mind that I personally highly advocate against overfasting. And overfasting is something I've been guilty of myself. And if you've been following my channel, you've seen that I definitely dry fasted a lot. And I have had to have this 6-month period where I was rehabilitating from the potential damages of what overfasting brings. And unfortunately, I see this so often because people who are really sick and feel so good after a dry fast you almost get addicted to that feeling. And unfortunately, as we know with most addictions, just because it feels good doesn't always mean that you should be constantly doing it. Same thing here. So if you've ever been hurt by any diets, like extreme diets from either spectrum, and here's like a zero carb diet versus like an extremely high carb diet, maybe too much OMAD, too much water fasting for too long. If you think that's you, you will probably have to adopt a rehabilitation style approach where you do limit fasting a lot. And if you ever need any help with this and deep dive into these problems, you can reach out to me. I don't really take on too many people, but if your case is unique and you're really, really, truly focused and willing to put in the time, then reach out to me. At a minimum, I highly recommend keeping an eye out on the Scorch Blueprint. And that's more than just my articles. The Scorch Blueprint is the Miro board link that goes into this big mind map that you can zoom in and out and look at it. And I'm constantly updating it. Definitely recommend. Okay, so next time you hear about the body's impressive ability to survive a dry fast, remember that aldosterone is a big part of that equation. It's not just about staying hydrated or avoiding water loss, but involves a sophisticated interplay of electrolytes and hormones, all designed to help you go longer without fluids than you'd even imagine possible. Whether you're exploring dry fasting for health or just curious, understanding aldosterone's part in the process adds a whole new level of appreciation for what the body can accomplish. Good luck on your dry fasting journey. Thanks for sticking around. Make sure you check out the dryfastingclub.com, where you can find protocols for members, as well as some extra Q&A videos about dry fasting science that you can't find anywhere else. Make sure you also check out the Twitter page, where I throw up random thoughts and insights about dry fasting in life. Lots of theoretical approaches and cool tidbits sewn throughout. Make sure you also check out the Discord group. It's hard to find a community that you can relate to. So just join the group, start chatting, and hopefully you can find some cool people to chat about dry fasting with. I know how horrible chronic illness is, and I hope that I can help you in some way and be a tiny help in finding your solution. Good luck on your dry fasting journey.